All right, in this video, we are going to discuss an example where there is a market with a positive externality, right? And so there's a positive externality, and we want to figure out what is the optimal Pigouviann subsidy to bring that market into to the level of output where that is socially optimal, right? Okay, so here's the market, right? So we see here is the private, marginal private benefit, and here's the marginal cost, right? And so that means the privately optimal quantity is going to be QP, right? So with no kind of market interventions, no taxes or subsidies or anything, the level of output would be QP, right? Now notice that there's a positive externality in this market because the private marginal benefit is less than the social marginal benefit, or the marginal social benefit at any given quantity, right? Society is getting more out of this good being produced than what people are getting in their own private lives, right? So there's a positive externality. When somebody consumes this, there's benefits to the rest of society, right? And so the optimal quantity of this good for society, this good that has a positive externality for society, is actually where the marginal social benefit meets the marginal cost, right? So it's actually, if you look at this point, the optimal quantity for society happens to be here. So the socially optimal level is here, Q sub S, and the privately optimal quantity is here, Q sub P. And so the socially optimal quantity is greater than the privately optimal quantity, right? And again, what we're looking for is a subsidy that would induce the private individuals in this market to increase the quantity of output for this good from QP, right, the privately optimal quantity, to the social optimally quantity Q sub S, right? So if you think about it, well, what does a subsidy do? Well, a subsidy is money paid by the government to either somebody who produces or somebody who consumes a good, right? So if we imagine the subsidy going to somebody who consumes the good, well, that means that the marginal private benefit would increase by the amount of the subsidy, right? So if my benefit from consuming a unit of this is equal to my marginal private benefit, but then I also get a subsidy on top of that, well then my marginal private benefit would increase by that subsidy. And that's why this red line that I've drawn here is the marginal private benefit with the optimal subsidy. It's actually, this red line should be parallel to this marginal private benefit line here, right? So they should have the same slope. So the distance is the same, and that distance is actually the size of the subsidy, right? So the idea is to raise the marginal private benefit through the subsidy high enough to the point where the marginal private benefit with the subsidy is equal to the marginal cost at the socially optimal level of output, right? And so this red line happens to be the marginal private benefit with the optimal subsidy, because it's raising the marginal private benefit enough that it goes through that point to induce people to want to produce and consume this level of output, right? Okay, and so that tells us that since these two lines, I mean, the way I've drawn it, they're not quite parallel, but they should be parallel. And since these two lines are parallel, the distance between them, the vertical distance between them, that is actually the size of the subsidy, right? And that's what I've got over here, right? So you can see the optimal Pigouviann subsidy, well, you can see that the dollar amount associated with the marginal cost at the optimal quantity, the socially optimal quantity, is 140, and the dollar cost with the marginal private benefit at the socially optimal quantity is 63. So that means we need to raise the private benefits enough that it goes from 63 all the way up to 140. So it's that distance there, the vertical distance. Again, which happens to be 140 minus 63, which is $77, right? So if government paid people a subsidy of $77 per unit of this good, that will induce people to produce and consume the socially optimal level of output, right? And so that's how a Pigouviann subsidy could work in a market with a positive externality. Thank you for watching.